Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're headed somewhere medicinal, or at least it claims to be. No antiseptic, no scrubs, just waxed leather, rotting incense, and the faint rattle of something dying behind a boarded window. Somewhere in Renaissance Prague, in a city already halfway buried beneath its own prayers, a barely trained physician has just been summoned to serve as plague doctor. That man is you. You're not quite qualified, but then again, no one is. Before we begin this slow descent into fever, vinegar, and institutional indifference, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd rather experience these stories without ads, or just want to help keep this channel alive, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you're listening in bed tonight, consider curling up beneath a weighted blanket for that gentle, crushing sensation that reminds your nervous system that there's absolutely no need to bolt upright at 3 a.m. again. I've linked my favourite one in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. It begins, as most terrible things do, with paperwork. You are a physician, technically. Your certificate hangs unevenly on the back wall of the apothecary's rear chamber, beside a dried bundle of mugwort and a jar labelled teeth. It is inked in a fine hand and bears 3 official seals, one of which is now obscured by mildew. You earned it after 3 years of irregular study under a man who had once, allegedly, drained an abscess belonging to someone related to someone noble. Most of your training involved learning to make eye contact while prescribing broth. No one ever asked if you knew what you were doing. You're fairly certain you don't. You live in a minor bohemian town, best known for its proximity to slightly more important towns. There are 2 churches, 1 inn, 1 apothecary, and 3 people who claim to be midwives. You are not one of them, though you're often mistaken for such, especially when someone's cow goes into labour and you're the only person nearby with hands that aren't actively filthy. Your daily work consists mostly of arguing with peasants about humours, being offered eggs in lieu of payment, and inspecting pustules you are assured are probably not contagious. Your most notable patient to date was a local alderman's nephew who once swallowed a coin and demanded it be retrieved intact. You declined. You do not have aspirations. You have a set of scales, 3 shirts, a copy of Galen that you keep meaning to read properly, and a back molar that aches when it rains. Your days pass in predictable increments. The butcher's daughter arrives every other Tuesday to complain of fainting. The baker's wife sends for you once a month to examine her husband's cough, which he refuses to demonstrate. Life is steady, modest, clean in the abstract sense, though never literally, until the letter arrives. It is brought by a rider in the middle of the afternoon and handed not to you, but to the innkeeper, who reads the name aloud while frowning. No one else shares your name, so you take it, nod politely, and excuse yourself behind the stable to open it. The wax seal is unfamiliar, municipal, official, slightly smeared. Inside is a single sheet of parchment with 3 short paragraphs and too many words like summons, obligation, and trust in your expertise. Your name is scrawled at the top in a hand that clearly does not belong to you. The final line reads, "You are hereby assigned to Prague to fulfill duties as physician in current crisis." The word crisis is underlined, which strikes you as unnecessary. You reread it twice, then check the back to ensure there's no additional commentary. There is none. You fold it carefully, return it to the envelope, and carry it to your quarters, like it might detonate. You place it on the table and sit beside it until the candle burns low. The next morning, you ride to the monastery to inquire whether someone might have sent this as a joke. The monks do not laugh. They direct you to the magistrate, who, after scanning the letter, nods solemnly and tells you that a cart will be arriving in 2 days' time to carry you east. You ask whether there has been some mistake. He says only, "We are all called to serve." You attempt to clarify that you're not particularly qualified to serve, that your Latin is poor, your sense of anatomy imprecise, and your understanding of contagion largely theoretical. He assures you this is all very common. Then he offers you a pouch of herbs and tells you to boil them in vinegar if your thoughts grow clouded. You do not ask what that means. You thank him, you go home. That night, you pack your things. It does not take long. 2 shirts, your scales, your copy of Galen, a knife with half a handle, and the remnants of a balm that once worked miracles on a particularly stubborn rash. You think briefly about leaving a note, but there is no one to write to. Your mother is dead. Your father left when you were 7, possibly to become a chimney sweep or a priest, depending on which neighbour you ask. You consider speaking with the apothecary, but you suspect he already knows. When you stop by the next morning, he offers you a sprig of rosemary and a brittle nod. You take both. The cart arrives at dawn on the 3rd day. It is not marked, nor is it clean. The driver does not introduce himself. He gestures at the back with one gloved hand, and you climb in. The bench is wooden and damp. A bundle of fabric beside you shifts slightly when you sit down. You do not investigate. The driver whistles for most of the first hour. Then the road worsens, and he stops. The journey takes the better part of 3 days. You pass through 5 villages and a forest that smells like wet charcoal. At one point, the cart is stopped by a local patrol who demand to see your papers. The driver hands them over without looking. One of the guards spits at your feet. "Crow," he mutters. You're not yet wearing anything distinctive, but they seem to know. When the cart moves on, you do not speak. The final approach to Prague is slow and unceremonious. The city looms beyond the next bend like something exhaled from the earth, dark, uneven, and shuddering in the haze. The outer walls are pocked with moss. The trees are bare. From a distance, it does not look like a place where anyone lives. It looks like a place that has recently decided not to die, but has not yet shared this decision with its lungs. As you near the gate, the driver finally speaks. "They'll meet you here," he says. You glance at him, startled by the sound of his voice. He does not elaborate. You climb down stiffly, gathering your bundle in both arms. The road is slick with half-frozen mud. A man in a rough city uniform approaches. He eyes you the way one might eye a cracked cistern. "Name," he says. You give it. He writes it down on a small slate, then gestures toward a side path that leads between 2 buildings. There's a room ready, instructions inside. You ask if someone will be meeting you. "They've been informed," he says. Then he turns and walks away. The cart is already gone. You stand there for a moment, the cold sliding down your spine in small polite increments. You look at the city gates, at the sagging buildings, at the rooftops lined with limp banners and soot. Somewhere behind one of them, a bell tolls. It is not a church bell. It is duller, lower, the kind of sound made to mark something off a list. You walk toward the alley. The alley smells like spoiled broth and wet brick. You walk slowly, bundle in hand, listening to your boots squelch through the half-frozen mud. The buildings lean at odd angles overhead, their eaves dripping, their windows dark. Somewhere above you, a shutter creaks open and then closes again without a word. The city does not welcome you. It observes. You reach the door the guard indicated. There is no sign, no marker, just a warped wooden frame and a rusted latch. You knock once out of habit, then let yourself in. The hinges complain as you enter, and the air inside is stale, sour with something medicinal, something old. The room is small and mostly bare. It has a cracked mirror on the wall, some old bookshelves, and it's lit by a single oil lamp on a crooked wall hook. A cot sits beneath the window, barely more than a plank with a folded blanket. There is a small table with a chipped basin and a tin pitcher of water that smells faintly of ash. Beside the door, leaning carefully against the wall as though it might collapse under its own symbolism, is the uniform. It is not laid out ceremonially. There is no fanfare, no instruction manual, no explanation. Just a pile of garments and implements, folded with the mechanical precision of someone who has done this before, many times. You step closer, unsure whether to touch them yet. The smell reaches you before your hands do. Old wax, bitter herbs, smoke, and the unmistakable mildew of something that has been stored too long in the dark. You crouch, setting your bundle down, and examine the pieces one by one. The coat is heavy and waxed, stiff with years of use and recoating. It was once black, perhaps. Now it is the colour of soot that's been scraped from a hearth and forgotten in a drawer. The seams are crude but intact, and the sleeves are long enough to conceal your fingertips. Beside it lie a pair of thick leather gloves, already curled slightly into fists by the memory of previous hands. The fingers are stained a dark reddish brown, as if something iron-rich once seeped through. Beneath the gloves, a leather belt holds an assortment of pouches and tools, a brass needle, a small bone-handled knife, a pair of tongs, and something that looks distressingly like a miniature branding iron. There is also a cane, long, narrow, and capped in iron. It is meant for poking from a distance, for measuring the space between you and the dying, for reminding them that you are not here to touch. The mask rests apart from the rest, on a wooden stool, like a guest that no one knows how to address. It is shaped like the head of a great carrion bird, all sharp angles and unnatural curve, the beak extending nearly a foot from the face. The lenses are round and dim, set in brass casings that have fogged with age. Inside the beak, you find a small sachet of herbs, rosemary, lavender, wormwood, and mint, dried and crumbling, meant to filter the air. You are to breathe through the beak and pretend it makes a difference. You sit on the edge of the cot and stare at the thing. You have read about it, of course. Every physician has. The mask is meant to protect you from miasmas, from foul humours that seep from the bodies of the afflicted and travel through the air like spirits. The herbs are supposed to purify the breath, to neutralise whatever corrupting force seeps from the boils and the bile. No one has tested it. Not seriously. There are no studies, no comparisons, just repetition, tradition, fear dressed up as protocol. You wonder whether that is intentional. Eventually, you find a folded sheet of parchment on the table. It bears the city's broken seal and a few short lines in tight script. Report to Old Town Infirmary at first light. Uniform is required. Contact is prohibited. All questions to be directed through proper channels. There is no signature, just the seal again, smudged slightly, and a red fingerprint near the corner. You set it down and wash your hands in the basin, though the water does nothing to warm your skin. You decide to try on your new uniform. You undress slowly, folding your clothes more carefully than you normally would. It feels wrong to leave them in a heap. As you strip, the air bites at your back. The room is colder now, or perhaps the garments are simply absorbing all the warmth they can before you give it up. You put on a plain linen undershirt first, then the heavy woolen leggings provided in the pile. They itch immediately. Then the tunic, thick and colourless, and the waxed coat over that. It groans as you pull it closed. The sleeves resist at the elbows, as though remembering someone larger. You cinch the belt tight around your waist and adjust the pouches until they sit without tilting. The gloves come next. They're too large, the fingers too long, but the leather softens slightly as your body heat seeps in. You flex your hands and hear the creak of worn seams. You think of the fingers that wore them before you. You try not to picture their faces. The cane feels heavier than it looks when you lift it. You give it an experimental tap on the floor. The sound is dull and immediate, like knocking on the lid of a coffin. You leave the mask for last. You hold it in both hands and inspect it again, as if expecting it to reveal something new. It does not. The beak is cracked in one place, just near the curve, and the leather straps have been restitched more than once. You lift it to your face and hesitate only a moment before pulling it on. It is heavier than you expected. The leather presses against your cheeks, the beak juts awkwardly downward, and the lenses cloud your vision instantly. You blink and the world distorts. Edges blur, corners bend, and shadows swell in strange places. You adjust the straps behind your head until the mask sits snugly, sealing you into your new silhouette. The smell is overwhelming. Mold and rosemary, wax and old breath. You take a few slow inhalations through the herbs in the beak. They do nothing to calm your stomach. Your own breath echoes back at you, shallow and mechanical, as if someone else is trapped just behind your face, mimicking your fear in real time. The lenses warp the room, turning the cot into a smear and the candle into a bleeding star. You walk slowly to the far wall, testing your gait. The coat swings heavily with each step. You catch your reflection in the cracked mirror. It is not quite a face, it is a suggestion, a shape meant to be feared but not recognized. Eventually you remove it and try to get some sleep. You rise just before dawn, your mouth dry and your joints aching from the cold. The air in the room is heavy with the sour remnants of boiled herbs and waxed cloth. You try to sleep, but the cot refused to cooperate. The pillow is stiff with old stuffing, and the blanket smells faintly of mildew. The uniform, draped across the stool in the corner, stares back at you like something waiting to be fed. You hadn't worn it through the night. After the first trial, after the beak distorted your breath and the lenses warped the candlelight, you'd removed it, folded it with care, and placed it out of reach. But even folded, it filled the room. You put your new uniform on slowly. Outside, the alley is still quiet. Frost crusts the edges of the cobblestones, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The city has not yet decided whether to rise. You walk with care, the cane tapping steadily as you make your way toward the infirmary. The few figures you pass do not meet your eyes. One pulls her shawl higher and crosses herself. Another simply turns and walks the other way. The infirmary is half hidden behind the skeleton of a collapsed chapel. Its roof slumps under the weight of decades, and the door is wedged open with a broken brick. There is no sign, but you smell vinegar and smoke before your hand even touches the frame. You step inside. A narrow hall greets you. The walls are streaked with damp, and a few wooden benches line one side, warped from age and exposure. The infirmary is quiet, though not silent. Somewhere deep inside, something metal scrapes softly against something wooden. You wait. Eventually a door creaks open, and a man steps through. He is thin and stooped, with grey stubble on his chin and dark stains on the cuffs of his robe. He wears no mask, just a rag tied loosely around his mouth, already damp. He eyes you without interest. "New one?" he mutters. "Come on then." You follow him into a cramped side room. It smells of boiled turnips, lamp oil, and old paper. A stove in the corner emits a grudging heat, though not enough to be called warmth. The clerk lowers himself into a creaking chair and gestures vaguely at the one across from him. You sit. He wastes no time. "You'll do rounds twice a day," he begins, his voice flat and disinterested. "Morning and dusk, you're assigned to the lesser quarter, a new town perimeter. South of the bridge, west of the grain road. Don't wander off. If you cross into Old Town, they'll assume you're lost or dead. Or both." He opens a drawer in the desk and removes a folded pouch. It clinks when he sets it down. Nails, cloth, chalk, red for marked houses, white if they've already been cleared. You mark the infected with a red scrap above the door, nail it through the frame, and move on. Don't use the door itself. Some still open them. He gestures to a narrow wooden cane resting by the desk, almost identical to yours. Use the stick, always. Prod, poke, tap. If they respond, good. If not, write it down. Don't touch them. Don't touch anything. If someone tries to touch you, back away. If they insist, leave. You nod once. The mask makes further responses unnecessary. Don't linger. If they're coughing blood or boiling, there's nothing to be done. If they're praying, don't interrupt. If they're screaming, don't wait for them to stop. He glances up from the desk. And don't waste time with children. The little ones carry it just as well, and no one wants to admit it. He pulls out a thin book and flips it open, revealing brittle pages marked with smudged ink. You'll record every case, address, symptoms, condition, estimated time of death. If they're still alive, write that too. No need for detail, just legible ink. The books go into the archive every 10 days, assuming you last that long. He closes the book and slides a blank one across the desk towards you. The leather binding is cracked. Yours, don't lose it. Don't let it get wet. Another sheet of parchment appears, your first list. The names are written in uneven lines, the ink already beginning to feather. 7 entries, each with an address, some marked with a red dot beside the name. You assume you'll find out what that means in due course. Today's your start. Make your rounds. Don't talk too much. Don't go inside unless there's no choice. He leans back in his chair with a long exhale. People won't want to see you. If they do, it's usually for the wrong reasons. Some beg, some offer coin, some just want someone to shout at. Let them. You tilt your head slightly. The clerk continues, eyes unfocused now, staring somewhere over your shoulder. You're not here to heal, you're here to witness. Keep the records, note the dead, nail the cloth, move on. He shifts forward again and gestures vaguely at your belt. Those tools, don't use them unless ordered. You're not a barber, you're not a surgeon. And if anyone asks for treatment, you can give them a vinegar wash or a prayer, nothing more. You glance at your list. The names are just ink and flourishes, already unfamiliar. You'll collect rations every 3rd day. Bread, lentils, salted meat, wine, no coin, no bartering. If you're robbed, don't fight back. If you're shorted, wait. His voice is flat, but not cruel, just practiced. Don't enter taverns, don't enter churches unless directed, don't enter brothels ever. His eyes settle back on you, dry and unblinking. You're not a man anymore. You're a warning. You nod again. There is nothing else to do. He rises slowly, joints clicking, and walks to the stove to prod at the embers. The fire responds with a reluctant crackle. Without looking at you, he adds, "And if you start coughing, report it. Don't wait for someone else to notice. They'll find someone to replace you. They always do." You reach for the list. He stops you with a raised hand. "One more thing." You pause. "There's no pay," he says simply. "Just rations and consideration from God." The silence that follows is not dramatic. It's just practical. You take the list and the ledger and stand. As you turn to leave, he mutters almost as an afterthought. "They say the first 3 days are the hardest. After that, you don't notice much anymore." You step into the hallway. Your footsteps echo against the stone. The mask fogs within moments of stepping outside. The morning air bites with a damp chill, and the fog that clings to the alleys feels thicker than it should. Your breath gathers inside the beak, warm and sour, seeping back through the herbs in short filtered puffs. The coat creaks with each step. Your boots are already streaked with muck by the time you reach the edge of the infirmary courtyard. The first name on your list is inked slightly darker than the rest. You assume it was written more recently or with more pressure. It doesn't matter. The address is scrawled in shorthand, but the directions you were given were clear enough. Head west until the chimneys run out, then turn left at the butcher's wall, the one with the angel carved into it that no longer has a face. You walk without hurry. The mask sees to that. The lenses limit your field of vision and warp the edges of everything they don't hide outright. Roof lines dip unexpectedly. People become shapes, low-moving, soft-shouldered, and indistinct. Most step away as you approach, A few simply freeze. No one speaks. You make your way through winding streets and past buildings, leaning in toward one another, like guilty priests. The cane in your hand taps softly every few steps, more for rhythm than for need. The first house is quiet. Too quiet. It's a narrow building with a red cloth nailed to the lintel, but no chalk mark on the door. You confirm the address twice before stepping closer. The shutters are closed, the lower one partially rotted through. You crouch slightly and tap the cane against the door frame. There's movement inside, barely audible, but no voice. After a moment, you tap again. A dry cough answers, then a shuffling. You raise your voice, muffled by the mask. You announce your presence and ask for symptoms. No one responds. You mark the door with a rough red X using the chalk from your pouch. The mark crumbles slightly on the wet wood. You drive a nail through the cloth at shoulder height, straight into the door frame, just as you were told. The fabric flaps faintly in the wind, a slow, soundless gesture. You write it all down in your ledger. Address, no response. Dry cough heard, door marked. Inhabitants, presumed symptomatic. You date it. Time is approximate. Morning, fog present. No visible lesions, no exit, no contact. The second house already bears a chalk X, but the cloth has been torn down. You hesitate. The clerk hadn't said what to do in this case. You decide not to replace it. You knock once with the cane. A voice from within shouts incoherently. Male, older, possibly drunk, though that's speculation. You record the noise and move on. The third house smells. It is an older building, one of the narrow kind with a warped wooden beam above the door, carved in a faded script you can't quite make out. The shutters are open on the second floor. A woman leans out briefly, sees you, and vanishes. You hear her retching behind the sill. You announce yourself. A few seconds later, a hoarse voice calls down that someone inside is not well. You ask how many people are in the house. The answer is vague. A few. You tap the doorframe. No answer from within. The woman coughs again, more violently this time. You write it down. You mark the door with red chalk and hang the cloth. This time, the nail splits the wood slightly. You don't bother fixing it. You advise the woman to remain upstairs, to boil water, to avoid contact. She doesn't respond. You leave. By the fourth house, you have stopped adjusting your mask. The beak pulls slightly to one side, the herbs shifting with every breath. The lenses are smudged near the bottom, where your gloves brushed them during your last note. You no longer try to clean them. You no longer try to see clearly. This house is different. There's no cloth, no chalk, no sound, but the door is slightly ajar. You hesitate, then knock with the cane. The sound echoes too loudly in the narrow street. A child answers, a boy no more than 10, barefoot and shivering, his eyes wide behind stringy hair. You ask if his family's ill. He nods. You ask how many. He says all of them. You ask who sent him to open the door. He says no one. You don't enter. You don't speak further. You hand him a red cloth and ask him to hang it on the door himself. He takes it like a handkerchief. You press a nail into his palm, careful not to touch skin. He nods and vanishes inside. You mark the ledger, slower now. At the fifth house, the shouting starts before you even approach. A man leans out a second-floor window, spits toward the street, and yells that they've already been seen, that there's no need for another mask, that if you come near his wife again, he'll burn your coat and bury your stick with it. You do not reply. You make a small note. Access denied, high resistance. You underline it twice. The sixth house is silent, utterly so. The shutters are closed, the curtains behind them unmoving. You knock 3 times, nothing. A neighbour across the alley peers out from behind a curtain and gestures faintly, 2 fingers up, then crosses her arms. You nod. You mark the door and hang the cloth. As you turn to leave, you hear something move behind the wall. Something low, dragging, wet. You walk faster. By the time you reach the 7th and final house, your gloves are damp with sweat inside. Your breath feels thinner. The fog has not lifted. It has settled lower, like a blanket tugged over a feverish child. The address is nearly illegible, but the numbers match. You find it at the end of a cul-de-sac choked with firewood and abandoned carts. One shutter hangs open. The door is ajar, and someone is crying softly inside. You step to the edge of the stoop and announce yourself. A voice answers. A man older, tired. He says they've been expecting someone. He doesn't sound angry, just hollow. He pushes the door wider. You don't step in, but from where you stand you can see part of the interior. A cramped front room, and beyond it, a doorway leading to the back. Open just enough to show a sliver of a cot and the figure lying atop it. You ask the questions. How long she's had the fever, whether there's swelling, if she's vomited, if there's blood. He answers with the rhythm of someone who's repeated these words to himself all night. 3 days. Yes, no, not yet. Then a voice calls out from the back room. A girl's voice, young but hoarse like parchment tearing. She asks if you've come to make her better. You don't answer. You shift slightly on the stoop and catch sight of her through the narrow sightline the door provides. She's small, flushed, sunken into her sheet like it's grown around her. Her eyes blink at the ceiling. Her lips move again. And then she jerks once, a sudden full-body twitch. Her father moves toward her but stops halfway. She starts to say something else, just one word, but it ends halfway through the breath. Her chest stops moving. Her eyes don't close. Her father lowers his head and turns slowly toward you. It's all right, he says, voice steady. Thank you. You stand still. There's nothing to say. You nod once. He steps back inside and closes the door. You mark the ledger, 7th house, female child, high fever, convulsions, died during observation. Parent present, no treatment administered, no hostility. You do not write how the father looked at you. You do not write what she tried to say. You do not write how long you waited before hammering the cloth into the frame. You hang the fabric, drive the nail, and move on. You return to your room just after dusk. The mask stays on until the door is closed and bolted behind you. The beak comes off slowly, tugging at your skin. You set it on the table beside the basin, where it stares back at you with mute accusation. The smell still clings to your face. Vinegar, rosemary, sweat. You pour a little water from the pitcher into your palms and splash your cheeks. But the stench has already sunk deeper than skin. You peel off the gloves and coat, then sit heavily on the edge of the cot, too tired to stretch but too tense to rest. You set the ledger on the table, open to today's entries. 7 addresses, 7 lives, 1 death you witnessed, 6 you didn't. You reread your notes, each line written neatly, each detail recorded as instructed. Symptoms, responses, conditions, none of it mattered. You know that already. But the book is a requirement, and requirements are easier to meet than results. There's a shelf on the far wall that you hadn't touched until now. It holds a few cracked votive candles, a broken scale, and a row of leather-bound texts, so swollen from damp that their spines bulge like overboiled sausage. You pull the first one down and wipe the dust off the cover. Tractatus de Pest, 3rd edition, hand-copied and heavily annotated. The handwriting shifts halfway through, as though the original reader died before finishing. You flip to a random page and scan the headings. Of the influence of Venus, on the corruption of air, bloodletting in the lower limb to draw heat from the lungs. It might as well be fiction. Still, you read, slowly, patiently, the way you were taught to read texts you didn't believe, reverently, but without investment. There is comfort in structure, even when it offers no substance. Paragraph after paragraph lays out the causes of the plague in exquisite irrelevance. You highlight one particularly circular passage with the end of your cane. The pestilence arises from a conjunction of Saturn with Mars under a humid wind, most frequently occurring when the moon is in Leo and the bile of the melancholic man is excessive. You close the book and pull another. This one is older, its pages nearly transparent in places. It begins with a prayer and ends with a list of punishments for unchaste behaviour. Somewhere in the middle, it claims that sins of the flesh rot the spirit, and that rot draws in the devil's breath, which smells like illness and enters through the nose. The solution, it says, is to avoid impure thought and to sleep beneath windows painted with lamb's blood. You make no note of this. The third book is a compendium of prescriptions, herbal mixtures, poultices, instructions for balancing the humours with dietary restrictions and controlled bloodletting. You recognise several of the formulas. You've brewed them yourself years ago during your apprenticeship. They never worked. You kept using them anyway, because that's what apprentices do. You remember the satisfaction of getting the measurements right, of boiling the ingredients down to the exact consistency described in the margins. The final product always smelled like promise, and always failed. You select one at random now, vinegar infused with crushed mint, mustard seed, and dried wormwood, supposedly effective for encouraging the spirits of the lungs to repel inward corruption. You still have some of those ingredients in your pouch. You mix them in the chipped basin with shaking fingers, half from the cold, half from something else. The liquid bubbles faintly, though whether from chemistry or decay you can't say. There's a sheet of parchment beside the ledger, blank. You're meant to write prescriptions when requested, though no one has asked yet. You think of the father who watched his daughter die, of the boy who nailed the cloth to his own door, of the woman leaning out of the second-story window, retching bile into the street. None of them asked for medicine. None of them expected help. Still, you pick up the quill and begin to write. Mix equal parts vinegar, mint, and mustard seed. Add wormwood until bitterness offends the tongue. Apply compress to the chest. Do not remove for 3 prayers' length. Burn cloth afterward. You stop. Read it back. Realize you've copied it verbatim from memory. You consider tearing the parchment, but instead fold it, press it flat, and place it at the back of the ledger. The room feels smaller now. The bookshelves lean inward. The mask on the table seems to watch. You reach for another book, this one newer, bound in red leather and wrapped with a silk ribbon. You untie it and find pages filled with drawings, pustules in various stages of bloom, cross-sections of lungs, comparisons between diseased and healthy bile. One image shows a pair of twins, conjoined at the stomach and covered in lesions. The caption reads, "Born under the comet, died unbaptized." The margin bears a note in faded ink, "Buried in consecrated ground, anyway, later reinterred." You close the book. It's not that you expected to find an answer. You've never been that naive. But you had hoped, perhaps, for a sentence that sounded plausible. A sentence that felt less like theatre. The clerk at the infirmary had said it plainly. You are not here to heal. You are here to observe. But observation has its own weight, and books are poor crutches. You light a candle. The wick sputters before catching. The flame casts the room in amber, turning the walls into a fever dream of flickering lines and shifting corners. You stare at the flame until your eyes blur, then blink once and look away. Your stomach growls, but you ignore it. Your rations are still tied up in the corner. Bread, salt pork, something that might once have been lentils. You'll eat later, or you won't. It makes no difference. Hunger does not mean much anymore. Not when so many die too quickly to feel it. You stand, stretch your back, and return to the basin. The tincture has settled into layers, a dark brown at the bottom, a yellowish film on top. You stir it once and watch as the colours swirl into each other without blending. You dampen a cloth and wring it out. It smells like sour herbs and frustration. You drape it over a hook to dry and pour the rest into a cracked jar beside the window. It might be useful later, or it might not. You pull another sheet of parchment from the pile and write a second prescription. This one is shorter. Boil dried rose hips with garlic and vinegar. Inhale steam. Repeat nightly. Cover mouth with linen soaked in same. You sign it with the abbreviated mark required by the city. You do not write your name. You haven't since the day you arrived. You're not sure you remember how it looks in your own hand. Outside, you hear the faint ring of a distant bell. Not a church bell. Those have fallen silent, but the dull clang of the corpse cart making its evening rounds. You listen to it pass, counting the echoes. 6, maybe 7, then nothing. You sit back down and reach for the final book on the shelf. It has no title, only a torn spine and pages that crinkle like dead leaves. Inside, someone has written personal notes, observations, rumours, entries with dates and locations. One reads, 3 sisters, all with black tongues, lived 5 days, 4th sister untouched. Another, dead dog in alley, 8 birds pecking at it. None fall ill. At the bottom of the page, in different ink, this means nothing. You underline that sentence. You return to the parchment and scratch out another prescription. Crush dried lavender and sulphur into paste. Spread thinly on soles of feet before sleeping. Burn shoes in the morning. You stare at it, fold it, file it away. Another treatment no one will ask for. Another page for a ledger no one will read. You mix another useless vinegar tincture and scratch another hopeless prescription. The tinctures pile up. At first you prepare them dutifully, each mixture brewed according to half-believed formulas, each cloth folded with the care of someone still pretending it matters. You line the jars along the windowsill and wait for requests that never come. Days pass like sediment, settling into sameness. No one asks for prescriptions. No one expects you to save them. So you begin walking, not just to homes on your list, but through the alleys between them. Shortcuts at first, then detours, then entire routes built for the sake of motion. The longer you stay in Prague, the less time you spend indoors. The less sense it makes to return to that damp little room and the books that never change. The city is larger than the pages ever promised, and quieter than it has any right to be. The alleys are narrower than the main roads and quieter, but never silent. There is always something breathing or crawling or watching. The buildings here lean together like guilty monks, blocking out half the sky. Gutters overflow with runoff and worse. Dead animals slump in corners. Cats mostly, but also dogs, a piglet, something feathered. Once you find what you think might be a child, until the shape reveals itself to be just rags and a broken doll. Rats weave between it all. They move like they belong. You stop trying to avoid them after the first week. They're constant, at your feet, in the walls, beside the corpse wagons. Sometimes you hear them before you see them. The scrabbling, the chewing, the wet slap of one body dragged across another. You used to bring your cane down when they got too close. Now you don't bother. They don't fear you, and you no longer have the energy to pretend you're in control. The stench is worse in the alleys. The air is heavy and slow, pooling in dips and crannies where wind won't go. The mask helps a little, but not enough. The herbs in your beak are stale now. You replace them mechanically, but the effect fades faster each time. The smells still push through: rotted food, split flesh, dried urine, old blood, and something deeper. Something sweet and cloying that no book ever described quite right. You keep your ledger close, but stop making daily entries. There is nothing new to record. The same houses rot in the same silence. The same chalk marks fade from the same doors. You see homes where the cloth has disintegrated, flapping threads hanging like discarded tongues. No one has touched them. No one has gone inside. Some days you lose track of where you are. You follow the pattern of your own feet. rounding corners you've seen 100 times, catching a glimpse of a shutter or doorway that should not be familiar but is. You mark your passage in small ways, scratches on brick, stones turned upside down, a nail left wedged into a window frame. Then you forget why you marked them at all. You pass the same bodies more than once. A man behind a barrel, slumped with his head against the wall, mouth open as if still mid-sentence. A woman curled in the lee of a bread cart, limbs folded neatly, hair still plaited. Children learn not to stare. They learn not to ask questions. You begin to envy their clarity. They still play. That's the part that never stops bothering you. Children with stick swords. Children throwing bones like dice. Children drawing shapes in the dirt with gloved fingers. Sometimes they play as plague doctors, mocking your posture, your gait, your mask. One boy wears a sack over his head and swings a dead branch like a cane. Another shouts diagnoses at the air and declares a stray cat contagious. The cat bites him. He laughs. You see the drawings too, chalked figures on doors and walls, long beaked masks rendered in crude lines. Some frown, others smile. One shows a plague doctor with wings flying above the rooftops. Below him, little people wave. Someone has scrawled cleaner than angels beneath it, then scratched it out. Not all streets are empty. A few vendors still cling to habit, selling onions or vinegar-soaked cloths to those who still believe in ritual. You pass one woman screaming that nutmeg can save the soul, another boils water with copper coins, and hands out spoonfuls to anyone who will listen. You note the locations. You never report them. The city has no interest in chasing false hope. It has too much of its own. You begin seeing signs of violence more often. Doors broken, windows shattered from the inside, blood smeared across shutters in the shape of crosses or hands. You never hear it happen. Only the aftermath. You ask no one. You are asked nothing. You sleep less. Not from fear, just from a kind of slow forgetting. You lie down each night knowing that rest is expected, but your eyes stay open under the weight of the mask hanging on the hook beside the bed. Sometimes you imagine someone else watching through it, someone who hasn't blinked in weeks. Sometimes you hope he has something better to see. You dream of walls that breathe and alleys that blink, of stone that gives underfoot like flesh, of voices shouting from behind nailed doors. But when you open them, only rats speak back. You wake in sweat. You wash your face, you dress again. Somewhere along your route, you begin passing a girl who sings. She sits near the base of an old statue, clutching a doll with no arms. The song has no words, just a melody that rises and falls like breath. Her face is pale, her hands smudged. You never speak. You nod once. She nods back. Then she sings. You hear her less often each week. You find new routes through familiar places. One path takes you past an open window where an old man kneels beside a body wrapped in a rug. He doesn't move, neither does she. You stand there a moment, waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. You walk on. In one alley you step over a line of teeth. Not bones, just teeth. Molars, canines, something that might have been a bicuspid. They are laid out in a row, spaced evenly. No blood, no jaw, no explanation. You do not record it. Your mask cracks at the base of the beak. Just a small split, enough to let in the colder air. You tape it with wax thread and press cloth against the seam. It holds, for now. You consider asking for a replacement. You don't. Late one afternoon, you follow a noise down an unfamiliar lane. A low chant, almost like prayer, echoes between the walls. You find its source, 3 boys, barefoot and ragged, kneeling in a circle around a rat nailed to a plank. They are murmuring something in unison. You cannot make out the words. When they see you, they scatter. The rat remains. You do not remove it. By now you've stopped checking your list. The clerk still gives you one each morning. You fold it, place it in your pouch, and do your rounds by memory. You no longer trust the names. They repeat, they contradict, they lie. One evening, as the sun smears itself across the rooftops like old butter, you turn a corner and come to a halt. A woman lies on the ground, half curled in the lee of a butcher's stall. She is clearly dead. One arm rests across her chest. Her skirt is soaked dark from the waist down. Her face is turned to the side, mouth open, eyes half-lidded. Beside her, 3 children crouch on the stones, playing dice. One throws, another cheers. The third accuses someone of cheating. None of them look at her. No one moves her. The days blur. Eventually, someone asks for your help. It surprises you. After weeks of silence, of shuttered eyes and turned backs, of people parting in the street like you carry death itself in your sleeves, the request arrives without ceremony. A man calls down from a second-story window, voice cracked from shouting, and tells you his wife is ill. Very ill, please. Just come see. You hesitate in the street. You weren't trained for hesitation. No one gave you instructions for what to do when someone believes in your usefulness. The books on your shelf have instructions, yes, diagrams, recommendations, things to rub and heat and drain, but they all speak with the same hollow certainty. None of it works. You've tried the vinegar compresses, the rosemary infusions, the burnt sulphur and camphor paste. You've poured broth into mouths that never swallowed and packed open sores, with boiled cloth that turned black by morning. Still, the man waits. He doesn't sound hopeful, just tired. You nod once and ascend the narrow staircase after he disappears from view. The house is crooked, everything sloping slightly to the left, the air thick with wood smoke and illness. The door to the sick room hangs open. You pause in the threshold. The woman lies on a cot, one leg propped on a bundle of rags. Her breathing is shallow. One arm hangs limp at her side. Her face is flushed and too still. Her eyes flicker toward you when you enter, but she does not move. Her husband stands in the corner with his hands clutched together, like he's holding something invisible. You step forward and begin the performance. First the questions. How long has it been? When did the fever start? Has she eaten? Has she vomited? Has she passed anything dark? The man answers in fragments. 3 days, then 5, not sure. Once, yes. You lift her sleeve gently with the hooked end of your cane. Her skin is pale except where it isn't. There, it's darkened to a purple-black bloom near the shoulder, with a swelling just beneath. A bubo. Her pulse beats visibly beneath the skin. A tremor in the rot. You set down your bag. There are tools you haven't used until now. A lancet, cleaned and oiled and placed into your kit, like it was waiting for a real doctor. You hold it briefly, then nod. You announce what you're about to do. The man nods back, eyes wide. The woman does not react. You lance it carefully, with as much precision as your trembling fingers allow. The skin gives like overripe fruit. What seeps out is foul, thick and yellow-grey. You wipe it with a cloth soaked in boiled wine. You whisper a prayer, not for her but for yourself, that this will do something, anything. You wrap the wound and tell the man she must stay warm, that she must drink broth, that the swelling must be watched. He agrees, again and again, until it sounds more like penance than hope. You return to that house 3 more times. The swelling returns each day, deeper and wider. The leg begins to turn colour at the toes. She stops reacting to your voice. You mix another tincture, rosemary, onion peel, crushed copper coin, and vinegar. You prescribe warm cloths, change the bandage, make sure the dressing is sealed with wax. You offer him a coin to boil in her drinking water. He accepts it like it's sacred. She dies on the 4th day. You mark the time, the cause, the treatment attempted. You write progressive necrosis in the margin, though you're not sure if that's true. You list the coin. You do not list the prayer. The man thanks you when you leave. You do not ask why. The next day, a woman in the southern quarter calls to you from a window. Her daughter is coughing blood. You follow her inside. The girl is curled on the floor, breath shallow, lips stained red. Her mother cradles her like something already gone. You offer a vinegar compress for her chest and a spoon of tincture. The girl retches. You suggest burnt rosemary. You light it yourself, wave the smoke beneath her nose. Nothing changes. She dies that night. You find her the next morning. The mother thanks you too. You record both names, though you never learned them. Soon the requests begin to increase. Not many, not even daily, but enough to make you open the jar lids again. You mix pastes in the basin and rub salves onto palms that no longer resist. You spoon broth between clenched teeth and watch it run down chins. You bleed a man who insists his fever is caused by demons in his stomach. You boil lavender for a woman whose son swears it cured their goat of sickness. You soak cloths in wine. You burn herbs. You do all of it. Nothing works. One man begs you to pierce his chest. He read somewhere that letting air into the lungs helps release the miasma. You refuse. He tries to do it himself the next day, the handle of a spoon wedged into the rib cage. He dies before you arrive. You write it down anyway. You underline it twice. You remember things your mentor said long ago when you were still an apprentice, that the body wants to live, that the doctor's job is simply to make that easier. You don't believe that anymore? You think the body wants to die, and medicine just slows it down long enough to watch itself fail. You begin to hear stories of other doctors in the city, men prescribing tar as poultice, or encouraging patients to bleed through the nose, or offering incense baths with dried fruit and goose feathers. One doctor apparently sews the mouths of the sick shut so they won't expel foul humours. You don't ask whether this is before or after they die. You're not sure it matters. The clerk at the infirmary never asks for details. He just collects your reports and hands you the next day's list. You stop bringing the prescriptions. He never reads them. You still write them, but less frequently. The handwriting drifts. Sometimes you write the same prescription 3 times without realising it. You begin to recognise smells more quickly. You know which ones signal infection, which mean decay, which mean nothing at all. Your mask is cracked again, and the herbs are useless, but it doesn't matter anymore. You've learned to breathe shallowly, to taste the air as little as possible. One woman calls you in to see her husband. His hands are purple. His tongue is blackened at the tip. She holds a bowl of broth and asks if she should keep trying. You tell her yes. She says thank you. He dies that night. You return in the morning to find her still trying to feed him. You tell her it's time to stop. She nods and sets the bowl down. You collect your things. Your tools are rusting at the edges now. You try to clean them with vinegar and cloth, but the stains remain. The lancet is dull. You sharpen it against a stone, hands shaking slightly. You wonder if your mentor would be proud. You wonder if he's still alive. You treat a boy with a swollen neck, and he screams when you touch him. You treat a baker who won't stop vomiting bile, and she dies mid-sentence. You treat a man who is already dead because his wife insists he just fell asleep. You press your fingers to his neck and feel nothing. You tell her gently. She nods. She thanks you. One afternoon, a woman with a leg wound stops you near the corner of St. Agnes Gate. She lifts her skirt to show the infection. Purple, weeping, hot to the touch through your glove. You apply a salve, clean the wound, bind it tight. You prescribe a boiled wine rinse and 2 coins, one to place beneath her tongue, the other in the pot. She thanks you. 2 days later, she is found slumped in the corner of a stairwell, leg black to the hip, lips blistered from fever. You write her name. You write the treatment, but you leave out how long you stood beside her before walking away. You cannot bring yourself to record it. The prayers begin again in early winter, not loudly and not everywhere, but often enough that you notice. At first you hear them from windows, soft chants in Latin, verses mumbled through cracked lips, or children repeating hymns too quietly to understand. Later, you see more signs, ash crosses drawn above doorways, candles left to gutter on ledges, pieces of bread left in the shape of doves, outside thresholds, already marked in red. Someone begins carving a crude cross into the handle of your door each night. You stop removing it. The city has grown quieter in some ways, but the spiritual noise has risen to fill the vacuum. The bells still toll irregularly, but now their purpose is muddied. Some ring for death, others for hope. A few, it seems, just ring to remind people that the churches are still standing, even if fewer people can fit inside at once, and no one stays long. The air in those places is heavier than incense. You are invited, or rather required, to attend your first burial pit blessing 2 weeks after the last documented frost. The clerk at the infirmary hands you the notice without a word. A mass grave is being consecrated just beyond the city wall, and someone in city records has decided your presence is practically symbolic. You're given a time, a location, and nothing else. You ask what your role will be. The clerk says only, "Don't speak." You arrive early. The burial pit is shallow and wide, dug unevenly into a patch of frozen earth that refuses to give up its grip without complaint. The bodies have already been placed, layered like discarded garments, arms and legs tangled, faces turned at odd angles. Some are wrapped in cloth, others are not. One hand still clutches a ribbon. Another is pressed to a chest, as if in the middle of a blessing that was never finished. The smell is not as bad as you expect. The ground is still cold. A small group gathers beside the pit. A priest in dark robes, a handful of robed assistants, a boy holding a censer that doesn't smoke, and several parishioners standing farther off. Shawls pulled high, collars turned up. You recognize none of them. That doesn't surprise you. You no longer recognize most faces, and most faces no longer recognize you. The priest begins the rite with a slow droning chant. You remain at the edge of the crowd, separate but present, the mask offering no expression and no explanation. The people glance at you, some quickly, some not. You hear the murmurs start around the second recitation of the psalm. A woman behind you whispers something. Her companion hisses for her to be quiet. Someone coughs. Someone spits. The priest avoids looking at you. His voice never falters, but his eyes never rise above his book. Even when he swings the censer, by then reluctantly smoking, he angles it away from where you stand. You receive no ash, no blessing. Just the faint sting of myrrh mixing with the herbs in your beak. The smoke makes your vision blur. When the pit is finally sealed, it is done with a rough hand and a shovel that has clearly buried too many. No one steps forward to weep. No names are spoken. The priest closes his book and turns without a word. The people follow. You are left standing beside the churned soil and the half-frozen dust. You mark nothing in your ledger. On your way back through the city, a child throws a clump of wet dirt at your legs. It misses barely. He laughs, but not cruelly. It's the laugh of someone testing a shape in the dark. His mother scolds him, not harshly. You continue walking. The churches begin requesting special permissions. Some want holy water distributed to the infected. Others ask that crosses be carved into the plague marks you place on doors. One monk insists that vinegar will not cleanse a house unless it is first prayed over with Psalm 91, the one about pestilence. You nod as he speaks. You do not implement the changes. No one notices. The priests stop blessing the sick in person. That duty now falls to younger monks, or none at all. Those too sick to walk to chapel are told to pray from home. The grave diggers no longer wait for clergy to consecrate. They do it themselves, or they don't. You stop asking. Once, on a late round, you pass a priest shouting scripture in the middle of the street, his voice echoing against stone and frost. He wears no mask, just a damp cloth over his mouth, and eyes red from smoke or lack of sleep. He is warning that the plague is punishment for civic greed, that the city must burn away its rot. He holds a book in one hand and a candle in the other. You do not interrupt him. He does not acknowledge you. You stop by one chapel to collect rations that have been moved there after the granary staff fell ill. Inside, the pews have been pushed aside to make room for cots. Half are empty. The rest hold bodies covered in sheets, waiting for either recovery or collection. A nun offers you a crust of bread and a small jar of wine. She won't meet your eyes, you thank her. She doesn't answer. You begin to notice changes in how people react to your presence. Not just fear or revulsion, those you've grown used to, but something sharper now. Suspicion, perhaps. Contempt. A sense that your mask does not mark you as a protector, or even as a functionary, but as something other, something unnatural. A woman crossing herself mutters, "crow" under her breath. A man spits as you pass, though he turns his head after doing it, as if he can't bear to see whether it lands. Someone nails a scrap of parchment to a post near the market. It reads, "He walks among the dying, but he does not die." Ask why. No one tears it down. You are called to a chapel near the east wall for an emergency blessing. You arrive to find the door locked and no one inside. You knock once. A voice from within says, "We thought you were someone else." You wait. No one opens the door. You walk away. Your name is never used, only your function. The doctor, the mask, the one with the stick. You begin to hear stories, some about you, some not. One claims a plague doctor carried the plague in a pouch of ash tied beneath his coat. Another says the beak is filled with the bones of saints. One boy tells another that if you knock 3 times on a door, the person inside dies by morning. The other boy nods. Says he's seen it happen. None of the stories are challenged. One evening, a monk approaches you as you make your way back toward your quarters. He is tall and thin, his robe patched in places, his eyes bright with the kind of certainty that only those untouched by illness can afford. He walks beside you for several minutes without speaking. Then he asks whether you've ever confessed. You tell him no. He asks if you would like to. You tell him that's not your role. He stops walking, says nothing. You keep going. Later that night you hear a knock on your door. A soft one, just once. You wait. No one speaks. When you open it, no one is there, but something is nailed to the frame. A rat, dead and stiff, splayed by the tail. Its front paws are stretched wide, its teeth bared, a nail through each limb. There is no message, just the smell, just the shape. You remove it in silence. You do not record it. You do not ask who sent it. You are neither doctor nor priest. You are an omen. You make your rounds the next day as usual. Fewer people are speaking now, and those who do avoid your eyes. The word doctor has become an incantation, muttered but never directed. You hear it behind shutters, see it passed between glances, but no one says it to your face. When you return to your quarters that evening, there's food waiting just outside the door. Flatbread, a hard-boiled egg, a lump of cheese wrapped in a kerchief. You do not know who leaves it. The cloth changes each time. Once it was yellow, once red, now grey. You take the food and fold the cloth neatly, place it on the shelf beside the masks you no longer wear. You consider leaving a note. You don't. No one speaks to you directly now. Not the apothecary, who no longer looks up when you enter, only slides a vial or bundle towards you with the flat of his hand before stepping back. Not the washerwoman, who collects your linens in a wicker basket left at the corner of the alley and returns them 2 days later, stiff from soap and overboiling. Not the clerk at the infirmary, who now stamps your ledgers without reading them, as if your handwriting might infect the air between you. At first you made attempts, short greetings, simple pleasantries, nods of acknowledgement, but they were not returned, not with words at least, only silence, and the occasional backward step. You began to suspect they couldn't hear you. Then you realised they just didn't want to. The mask does most of the talking now. Its presence clears streets, shortens conversations, opens doors with a single glance. You've noticed that people treat it like a face, not yours but its own, as if it has its own opinions, its own judgment. its own memory. Children still mimic it in chalk and paper, drawing cartoon beaks on walls and pretending to faint at the sight of them. Adults do not joke. They treat you as they would a storm, something that arrives, does what it must, and then moves on without apology. You eat alone. You sleep alone. You speak to yourself now, not out of madness, but necessity. Short phrases, lists, repetitions. You keep your own voice alive just long enough to remember that you have one. There is a man who sells vinegar-soaked cloths at the edge of the grain market. He used to call to you when you passed, offering samples with a broad grin and claims of spiritual purity. Now he simply nods. His cloths are always damp, always over-fragrant. You've stopped telling him they do nothing. He already knows. You stopped going to the chapel. The last time you entered, 3 women left their pews and stood by the door until you were gone. One of them dropped her prayer book. You picked it up. She didn't take it back. You begin sleeping at odd hours. Not full nights, just intervals. Collapsing on the cot for a few hours, waking at dusk or dawn or sometime between. You lose track. The candles burn out more quickly now, or perhaps you light them more often. You find yourself staring at the flame for minutes at a time, forgetting to blink. The mask rests beside you during these intervals, facing the ceiling. You sometimes turn it to face the wall instead. It feels impolite otherwise. You write fewer notes in the ledger. Most of your entries are reduced to symbols. Arrows, slashes, a small circle for the deceased, a triangle for the still living. You no longer distinguish between symptoms unless they are unusual. The usual ones mean nothing. You do not report them because you're no longer asked to. There is a boy who follows you now and then. You see him just out of the corner of your vision. A flash of brown coat, a tuft of hair, a blur that disappears as soon as you turn. Once you confronted him. He vanished behind a wall. You waited 5 minutes. He never reappeared. You didn't chase him. You no longer chase anything. You pass shuttered windows and wonder what lies behind them. Who is dying? Who is already dead? Who is pretending not to be either? You used to knock once early on. Now you mark the door if it smells wrong. If no one answers after 3 taps, if the cloth is missing, if the shutters are closed too long. You don't always confirm. Sometimes it's easier to assume. The boots you wear have started to fall apart. The soles are softening from rain and blood and everything else they've absorbed. You tried patching them with fabric, then with bark, then with folded parchment. None of it holds. You've requested replacements. They haven't arrived. The rats still follow. At night, you hear them outside the window. You no longer startle. You listen instead. Their movements are predictable. Scrape, pause, skitter, pause again. You think you've learned the rhythm of their fear. It is slower than yours, but steadier. One night, you return to find someone has left a book on your stoop. Not one of the usual texts, not medical, not religious, not official. Just a small volume of folk remedies, hand-bound and illustrated with simple drawings. You open it inside. The first recipe is for a bitter sleep syrup, made with ash bark and onion skin. The second recommends sleeping with a silver coin beneath the tongue. The third is scratched out. You keep the book. You keep everything now. Scraps of fabric, old herbs, buttons, bits of twine. You no longer remember what might be useful, so you assume all of it might be. You fold and file and line them in rows beside your cot. You begin referring to the rows by purpose, comfort, cleansing, silence. You say the words aloud sometimes to make them real. You begin to dream again, but the dreams are distant. Blurry shapes, long hallways, muffled footsteps. Occasionally, a face appears, but it is never yours. The beak enters your dreams now, floating through fog, never speaking. You wake unsure if it watched you all night, or if it only arrived when you closed your eyes. The ledger grows heavier, not from the pages, most are still blank, but from what clings to it. You carry it like an obligation, not a record. You write names you'll never say aloud. Sometimes you forget to write at all, and by the time you remember, you no longer recall which house was which, who lived, who coughed, who didn't. Once, on your way back from the southern quarter, a child sees you and screams. Not out of fear, but joy. She thinks you're part of a festival. Her mother pulls her away so fast she falls. You keep walking. The food still appears, always in the evening. Bread, broth, an occasional root vegetable. Sometimes there is salt, sometimes not. You begin leaving the bowl outside again once you've finished, cleaned and inverted in case that matters. The kerchiefs pile up on the shelf. You don't count them. The chair by the window grows more comfortable than the cot. You sit in it for hours staring at nothing, listening to the shift of the building's bones as it settles deeper into its foundation. You think you can hear the city sigh sometimes. You wear the mask longer each day. At first it was only outside, then inside while preparing tinctures, then while writing. Now some days you keep it on into the evening, until the candle gutters and the shadows reach your feet. You tell yourself it's just easier, that it saves time, that it keeps your face warm. That night you don't remove it. You lie down without ceremony, arms crossed, boots still damp. The mask pressing gently against the pillow, the beak casting a soft shadow over the edge of the cot. Your breath echoes back at you in slow rhythm. You fall asleep still wearing your mask. It feels safer that way. You barely notice the knock when it comes. One soft rap against your door frame, then silence. When you open the door, no one is there. Just a folded note on the ground, weighed down with a coin. You recognize the clerk's handwriting even before you bend to pick it up. The message is brief. The city has opened a new burial site outside the northern wall. Records are incomplete. Your presence is required for inspection, observation, and official documentation. No instructions on what you're expected to find. No signature. You don't ask why you were chosen. You already know. Fewer doctors remain, and fewer still are willing to walk where the ground stays soft. You put on the mask, tie the coat tight, and slip the smaller ledger into your pouch. The body pits have always existed at the edge of your awareness. Heard of, but seldom seen. Implied in the silence after certain addresses. Whispered about behind doors where no one wants to say the word mass. Until now, they've remained a background presence, like bells heard through fog. Now, they are your destination. The grave is located beyond the old northern wall, past the last row of leaning houses, down a slope of half-frozen earth and wind-burned grass. The cart that brings you there is silent. The driver says nothing, barely nods as you climb in. His gloves are too thin for the frost, and his breath fogs around the scarf knotted over his mouth. You do not speak. The road is rutted and hard. The ride is long. You smell it before you see it. The scent strikes like a low tide made of something human. Thick, sweet, and decaying, with a heat that clings to the inside of your mask and seeps into your tongue. The herbs in the beak do nothing. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, but the smell presses inward like damp cloth. It settles behind your ears. The site is larger than you expected. Not a neat pit, but a sprawling trench, half dug, its edges already collapsing inward from use and neglect. The ground is churned mud, slick with frost where the sun hasn't reached. A few crude boards lie discarded nearby, warped from carrying too much weight. The grave is full, but not sealed. Bodies lie stacked in uneven layers, some turned on their sides, others face up with mouths half open. Arms are crossed, twisted, or flung out, as if caught mid-motion. Some are wrapped in cloth, most are not. You count more than you can immediately comprehend. Faces blur, shapes merge. The impression is not of individuals, but of weight, volume, density, a wave of the human form compressed into a trench. Two diggers stand nearby, scarves pulled up over their noses, shovels resting against their shoulders. One smokes, the other stares past you, neither speak. You nod, out of habit more than courtesy. Neither nod back. You open the ledger and begin to write. Date, weather, soil condition, number of visible bodies, approximate, signs of disorder, positioning, evidence of rot beyond baseline expectation. You get 3 lines in before you stop. The smell is worse near the edge. You step carefully, boots sinking into wet ground. You try not to slip. The first body you observe is a young girl, no older than 10. Her hands are curled beneath her chin. Her eyes are closed, or perhaps pressed shut by someone else. Her skin has gone grey in the places where it isn't blue. You don't write anything. The second is a man with a split lower jaw. His tongue is visible, protruding slightly. The skin around his neck has begun to rupture. One eye is still intact. You blink and move on. The third is a woman, partially covered by another body. Her arm thrown across her chest, as though trying to shield herself. Her face is turned inward. You see her bare feet. One of them is missing 2 toes. You try to make another note, but your hand hesitates. The quill hovers, then drops. You turn the page. The air sticks to you now. The stink has found its way inside the mask, around the herbs, past the seams. You feel it behind your teeth. You taste it in your throat. Your stomach clenches and you turn away from the trench, dry heaving once into your sleeve. The diggers glance toward you, then back to their work. They lower more bodies in while you stand there, not reverently, but not cruelly either, just as labour performed without drama. They slide the dead down planks like sacks of grain, shifting arms and legs to fit the space. Occasionally, they stop to adjust a limb. One wipes his forehead, the other spits. You write that the bodies were layered with care. You don't know if that's true. You make your way along the edge, noting anything that seems unusual. An old man with a prayer ribbon tied to his wrist, a youth with tattoos along his forearms, a woman with her hair braided still, stiff with dirt. Someone placed a folded piece of parchment between 2 bodies. You do not open it. You do not move it. You record its presence, then cross it out again. At the far end of the trench, beneath a collapsed section of earth, you spot a face you recognize. You can't recall the name, but you remember the eyes. They belong to someone who once offered you bread when you marked her neighbour's door. She said nothing at the time, just held out the loaf. You took it, you left. Now her mouth is frozen open. Her hands are buried beneath her back. You step away without writing anything. The diggers begin to fill the trench with dirt. You watch the first few shovelfuls fall. Dark, wet, heavy. It sticks to the exposed limbs. It dulls the contours of the bodies. The shapes blur further. You turn away before the grave is half covered. You close the ledger. The walk back to the cart feels longer than the ride in. The driver doesn't ask questions. You do not offer answers. The wind is colder now. The sun has already begun to sink behind the rooftops. The trees around the graveyard bend with the wind, brittle-limbed and thin. When you return to your quarters, the stench still clings. You peel off the mask and hang it on its hook. You strip the coat, the gloves, the boots. You soak your hands in vinegar, then wine. You scrub the skin until it turns pink. You do not feel clean. You do not eat. You do not boil tea. You sit in the chair by the window and stare at the wall until the candle burns halfway down. You do not dream. The next morning, the clerk already has a new list prepared. 7 names, 7 addresses. The handwriting is slightly crooked. The wax seal smeared. You fold it without reading. The mask goes on again. It's late afternoon when they bring her to you. You've just returned from inspecting 2 houses on the riverfront, one with a locked cellar full of uncounted bodies, the other with a single corpse propped in a chair, as if still waiting to be noticed. The light is low by the time you reach your quarters, the sky flickering between brass and rust. You unhook your mask, untie your coat, and sit down with the intention of doing nothing. Perhaps just existing, quietly, for the length of a candle, perhaps forgetting, But then there is a knock. Not the usual hesitant scrape from the apothecary, nor the perfunctory tap of the city clerk. This one is different, measured, hopeful. You open the door to find two people, a man and a woman, plainly dressed, with mud still clinging to the hem of the woman's skirt. Between them stands a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wrapped in a shawl that doesn't belong to her. Her cheeks are red from the cold. She's breathing shallowly through her nose, and her eyes, while alert, are slow to move. She's not coughing, not yet. The father speaks first. His voice is soft but clear. She had a fever last night. It passed, then came back this morning. We thought it might be from the wind or from the bread. She took too much butter, maybe. But now she says her head aches and her stomach turns, and she cannot eat. You do not answer right away. You study the child. Her colour is off, not pallid, but wrong, as if the hue belongs to another kind of illness entirely. She clings to her mother's fingers, but does not seem frightened. She is tired more than anything. The mother speaks next. There is no swelling. We checked. Her breath is steady. You want to tell them to go. You want to tell them that if she is not yet ill, she will be soon, either from the city or from the visit. That the walls of your rooms are soaked through with contagion, that nothing here is safe or sacred, least of all you, but they are already inside. You fetch the thinner gloves, the pair that allows for finer movements. You do not put on the full coat, only the mask. The girl watches you curiously as you kneel before her. You check the buboes under the arms and at the groin. You test her pulse, pressing gently against her wrist. You listen to her breathing. You ask when the fever began. The father answers again, more precisely this time. Sometime just before dusk, she said she felt dizzy, but she kept playing. You ask if she's vomited. The mother shakes her head. You ask if there has been any bleeding. The answer is no. You ask if she's eaten today. The father hesitates. Just broth, but she kept it down. You press your hand to her forehead, then to her cheek. The warmth is there, but inconsistent. You note the faint sheen of sweat above her lip. Her eyes follow your movements, but slowly. The moment you stop touching her, she shivers. You begin to hope. It's not something you do often anymore. Hope, that is. You deal in probabilities, in containment, in the semblance of action rather than outcome. But something about this child, a certain calmness perhaps, or the fact that she walked in on her own, pulls at a part of you you thought long abandoned. You find yourself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this one will live. You mix a compress, vinegar, crushed thyme, dried rose hips from a jar long expired, and soak a cloth in the mixture. You instruct the mother to place it along the child's back and over the chest, alternating every hour. You prepare a small packet of dried mint and instruct them to brew it into tea. Just barely warm, no sugar. You write it all down, slowly and clearly, as if the clarity of the ink might help the child survive. They thank you as you write. The father says, "You've done more than most." The girl looks up at you once. Her eyes are clearer now, or perhaps you only want them to be. They leave. You do not sleep well that night. You do not remember what you dreamed, only that it was warm, and then cold, and that someone knocked, and that you couldn't open the door. The next morning there is no note, no message. You go about your route, another house marked, another face missing its name, but your thoughts return to the girl. Each time you pass a corner, you half expect to see her mother's shawl. Each time a cough rises from an alley, you tense, but the day passes, the sky darkens, still no word. Then the following afternoon, they return. The father stands alone this time. The shawl is folded in his hands. His eyes are red, not wet, not weeping, but raw. You do not ask. You do not need to. She passed just after dawn, he says. You nod slowly. She was comfortable at least. She didn't cry. We followed your instructions exactly. You nod again. She said your name at the end. Said you looked like a bird. You manage a faint exhale that might pass for sympathy. Your fingers curl slightly at your sides. The mask is still on its hook. You haven't yet left for your rounds. We buried her in the garden. The priest won't come, but we said the words. My wife stitched a cross into the shawl. He hesitates. I just wanted to say, thank you for your blessing. You want to tell him it wasn't a blessing, that you failed, that the tea was meant to soothe, not save, that the compresses were ritual, not remedy, that nothing you did made any difference at all. Instead, you accept the thanks, you incline your head, you let the moment pass. He leaves the shawl, you do not pick it up. Later, when you put the mask back on and step into the street, the air feels colder than usual. The light is too clear, too brittle. You walk more slowly. You record fewer names. That night, you stare at the blank page in your ledger for a long time before you write anything. When you do, it's only a single line. Child, fever, 3 days. You scratch it out. Then write it again. Then leave it. There are many deaths you can ignore. The anonymous ones. The ones that come too quickly for recognition. The ones you find already blackened, mouths open to a sky that never answers. But some deaths cling. They settle into the folds of your coat, the pores of your skin, the spaces between one footstep and the next. They lodge behind your eyes, waiting for sleep to weaken the gate. Those are the ones you learn to bury deeper. And if you are careful, if you fold them inward, tuck them beneath the practiced layers of indifference and repetition, and mask, they almost stay hidden. Almost. It starts with a murmur, the same way everything does in this city now. A whisper along a stall line. A word repeated twice in the same breath. A question phrased as accusation. Did you hear? Did you see? Did you know? By the time you pass the market on your afternoon route, the whisper has grown legs. People gather in tight knots, heads tilt together. Bread is no longer sold with haggling, but with urgency. The fishmonger doesn't lay out his catch today, just packs it in salt and mutters about them. You do not need to ask who them is. You hear it fully for the first time when passing the old stone gate. A boy on a barrel yells to no one in particular. They poisoned the wells! That's what the priest said. Whether the priest actually said this is unclear, and by now irrelevant. The Jewish quarter lies downwind of the old cathedral, near the bend in the river where the stench of the tannery never fully lifts. You've walked that path before. You've passed quiet scholars with ink-stained sleeves and bakeries whose loaves smell sweeter than anywhere else in the city. You once treated a young rabbi for an infected tooth long before your summons. He paid you in dried apricots and a careful smile. Now, as you approach the same curve in the road, the air feels taut. A wrong cord held too long. There is shouting ahead. Then something breaks. Glass, pottery, a voice. You do not go farther. You do not need to. Smoke rises from somewhere behind the tiled roofs. Not from a chimney, but from the wrong angle. Too low, too quick. It carries the sharp smell of oil and linen. You hear metal strike stone. Then more voices, running, crying, screaming. Later, when the clerk visits your quarters, he avoids saying pogrom. He calls it a civil disturbance. He says unrest. He says misdirected grief. You say nothing. You know it was not misdirected. It was invited. The blame was inevitable. The plague needs a culprit, and God has grown distant. The city needs someone to hurt, someone who can't fight back with armies or sermons. The poor cannot be blamed. The rich are too few. The sick are too pitiful. That leaves the usual targets, the ones who speak differently, the ones who pray in the wrong direction, the ones whose dead are buried in separate soil. And then there's you. You are not from here. You are summoned, unwanted, unnamed. You carry a ledger and wear a mask with a bird's beak. You enter homes and bodies. You speak in terms no one else understands. You do not save. You only visit. And so, 2 days after the fire, when you walk back from a house on the outskirts, having recorded 3 deaths, 1 alive and 1 missing, you round a corner near the square and find a group waiting. They are not armed, they are not organised. That would make it easier to report. No, they are just present. A few men leaning against a wall, a pair of women standing behind a cart, a boy with his hands in his pockets. You pass slowly. You do not speak. You are used to being ignored. This time, you are not ignored. Something soft hits your shoulder. You flinch. It slides off your waxed coat and lands at your feet. A peach, half rotten, its skin sagging. You do not bend to pick it up. Another lands behind you, a crust of bread. Then something wet, cabbage or worse. You keep walking. Someone spits. The sound is louder than it should be. Then a voice. Death's crow. You keep walking. Another. Murderer. You keep walking. And then a new sound. Not a word, but laughter. Not joyful, not kind. The kind of laughter that follows fear, like rats follow fire. It catches on the edges of the square. It follows you all the way back to your door. No one throws anything that breaks. No one steps forward. They don't need to. They've made their point. That night, when you remove your mask, you find a smear of something clinging to the edge of the beak. It smells faintly of plum and mould. You clean it off in silence. No one reports the riot, not officially. The city clerk notes a structural fire near the quarter and minor citizen unrest. The apothecary shrugs when you mention the smoke. No one important was killed, he says, and then corrects himself. I mean, no one we knew. You do not ask the priest. When you pass by the old rabbi's bakery again a week later, it is boarded shut. Ash clings to the cracks in the stonework. No one looks at it. No one mentions it. You mark its address in your notes, though there is nothing to record. You start taking different routes home. Not because you're afraid, not exactly. Just to avoid the eyes, the words, the silence that grows around you like mildew. But none of it changes the work. You still lance boils, you still mark doors, you still press your ear to chests and pretend you hear things that can be cured. You still write in your ledger. You still eat alone. You still wake with the taste of ash in your mouth and the mask beside your bed. The city continues. Rot seeps upward from the alleys. The priests blame Saturn. The patients blame sin. The merchants blame the moon. The magistrate blames the river. The grieving blame the doctors. No one blames the plague. That would be too simple, too final. It is easier to hurl fruit at a man than face the weight of dying. Easier to spit at a mask than bury your own child. Easier to curse the crow than the silence it lands in. And so you walk home with cabbage in your hair and vinegar in your coat. The sun sets behind the chapel and someone laughs as you pass. You do not turn, you do not stop. You are not a man to them anymore. You are the rumour they've been looking for. You wake before dawn and know something is wrong. Not with the city, not with the world, with you. It begins with a cough, not loud, not dramatic, but dry and insistent, buried in your throat like a question you're not ready to ask. You sit up slowly. The air in the room is cold, sharp in your lungs. Your hands are unsteady as you light the oil lamp. There's no blood in the sputum. That's your first reassurance. You check again, still nothing. Just clear phlegm and a faint, bitter taste that lingers too long on your tongue. You tell yourself it's the smoke from the street, the incense the priests have taken to burning, the layers of vinegar-soaked herbs in your beak. You've inhaled enough fumes this month to kill a lesser man. You run through your usual morning routine: soap, water, vinegar, rinse. But everything takes longer. Your limbs feel heavy. Your stomach churns at the smell of breakfast, and you leave the bread untouched. When you reach for your gloves, your fingers twitch. Once, twice. You stop and look at them. Your right hand doesn't want to close properly. You try again, slowly. It obeys, but with hesitation. The thought arrives uninvited. it's nothing. The second follows quickly, or it's everything. You examine yourself like a stranger, eyes in the mirror, sunken, lips dry, skin flushed, but that could be from the chill. You stick out your tongue and check for dark spots. You try to remember the charts from the university. Which colour means bile, which means rot? It's pink. That should mean health. But your throat burns. You check your temperature, the only way you know, by touch, against the cool glass of the window pane. It's not precise. It doesn't need to be. You're warmer than you should be. Too warm. You tell yourself it's the stress, the sleeplessness, the smell that clings to your coat, your mask, your pillow. You get dressed anyway. There is no protocol for this, no section in the clerk's orders that covers what to do when the plague doctor becomes the patient. You could report yourself. You could write your own name at the top of the list and deliver it with the others. But then what? No one will treat you. No one will open their door. You have no family in the city, no friends. The priests won't bless your quarters. The apothecary won't touch you. You know what happens to the infected. You've seen the stages unfold. You've watched it begin with a cough and end with twitching limbs and open sores, the body split like fruit under too much sun. So you stall. You open the window, let the air in, let the light hit your skin and tell yourself it's not a fever, just nerves, just fatigue. You hold your hand steady against the edge of the table. It trembles anyway. Your mask sits on the shelf where you left it. You pick it up slowly, as though it might recoil. You put it on. The smell of vinegar and rosemary fills your nose again. It anchors you, reminds you of routine, of rituals, of how a mask can become a kind of prayer. You step into the street. Everything is quieter today. The baker's shutters are still drawn. The fountain in the square has stopped flowing again, clogged with leaves or worse. Even the stray dogs seem to have retreated, their barks replaced by the distant toll of a bell you don't want to count. You walk your usual route. You greet no one. No one greets you. That's normal. You record 3 new deaths, 2 suspected infections, 1 child who might live. You keep your distance, careful not to touch anything with your bare hands. You use your cane to lift cloth, to tap shoulders, to draw back curtains. The mask hides your face, but not your fatigue. You can feel sweat building beneath your coat by mid-morning. The air is cool, but your skin is burning. You pause in a narrow alley and brace yourself against the wall. You do not sit. If you sit, you might not stand again. At noon, you return to your quarters. You tell yourself it's to refill your ink, to fetch your backup ledger, to rest your feet. But really, you just want to check. You close the door behind you and peel off the gloves. Your fingers are red and sore. The tremor in your right hand has spread to the wrist. You lift your mask and check your eyes in the cracked mirror. They are bloodshot, not unusual, but your pupils are slower to respond than they should be. The fever is no longer subtle. You feel it in your skull now. A pulsing behind the eyes, a weight in the temples. You want to lie down. You want to stop. But instead, you sit at your desk and pull the morning report toward you. The list is short today. You stare at the top, at the blank line where the city clerk expects a name. You write your own. Then you cross it out. Not yet. You fold the list and tuck it under the ledger. You breathe. Once, twice. Each breath feels like sandpaper. You mix a tincture. Nothing useful. Just honey, cloves, and watered wine. You swallow it and force yourself to believe in its placebo. You sit very still until the trembling dulls, until the taste of metal fades. No one knocks at your door. No one checks on you. No one expects you to be human. You begin to write, not in your formal hand, but in the scrawl you use when you're not expected to show anyone. You describe the fever, the tremors, the heaviness in the chest. You note the time, the temperature of the room, the state of your stool, the texture of your tongue. You record everything, because no one else will. And when you finish, you sit back and close your eyes. You are not dead, not yet, but you are no longer sure which side of the ledger you belong on. There is no one to diagnose the plague doctor, only the mask and the trembling hand that still insists on writing. You sleep for most of the next day, if it can be called sleep. You drift in and out of something dull and bottomless, your dreams thin and grey around the edges. In them, you are still working, still moving down streets that bend the wrong way, still lifting blankets from bodies that are already yours. When you wake, it takes a long time to separate the walls of your room from the walls of the burial pit in your mind. You are soaked in sweat. Your nightshirt clings to your back like a second skin. The sheets have curled beneath you. You do not remember climbing into bed. You try to sit. You try again. Your muscles feel like soaked cloth, limp and reluctant. When you do rise, the effort turns your vision white for a moment. You lean against the wall until it passes, one hand pressed flat against the plaster, the other dangling useless at your side. You are breathing too fast. You force yourself to slow it. In, outside, again. You touch your forehead. The heat is worse now. Not a flush, but a burn that lingers even in the joints. Your knees ache. Your ribs ache. Your jaw aches. You test your tongue against the roof of your mouth and recoil. It's swollen. You hadn't noticed. You do not get dressed, not fully. You drape your cloak over your shoulders, because the chill is unbearable, but you don't bother with the boots. Your feet are too tender. You shuffle to the basin and pour out water for your face. The jug trembles in your grip, sloshes, nearly slips. The water on your skin stings. Your reflection is worse than yesterday. Dull eyes, cracked lips, dark splotches blooming at the corners of your jaw. Your breath fogs the glass and hides the rest. You let it. There is a rasp in your chest now. You can feel it when you speak aloud, a small experiment in self-recognition. Not yet, you whisper to the mirror. It comes out hoarse, dry. The mask is on the shelf again, exactly where you left it, but you do not reach for it. You doubt you could wear it now. The smell alone would make you retch, and the straps feel suddenly impossible. You sit at your desk. Your hand shakes too badly to write legibly, but you try anyway. Not a report, not even a record, just your name. You scrawl it across the top of the page, once, twice again. It no longer looks right. You circle the worst one. You cross out the others. Then you stop. Your heart is pounding from the effort. The floorboards creak when you stand. You make your way to the window and crack it open, just enough to let in the afternoon air. You half expect a voice to call up from the street. Some errand boy demanding a report, some widow asking for a tincture. But there is nothing. The silence is not peace, it is absence. You eat half a plum and vomit into the basin. After, you sit on the floor with your back to the wall, eyes closed, arms draped across your knees, like you're hiding from schoolmasters. You tell yourself, you'll try broth later, you won't. At dusk the fever peaks, you know the pattern by now. The chill first, then the sweating, then the shaking, then the pain behind the eyes that makes the world spin if you move too quickly. It passes in waves or seems to. You've recorded enough deathbeds to notice the rhythm. You curl up on the cot, pulling your knees toward your chest as best you can, and let it run its course. The smell of yourself is unbearable. Sickly, acrid, sour, like old vinegar and spoiled meat. You try not to breathe too deeply. You dream again. This time, you're in the pits, but no one is burying you. Instead, you stand at the edge, reading from your own ledger, name after name after name. When you finish, you look down into the grave and see 100 versions of yourself, all in the coat, all in the mask, all pointing up at you, silent. You wake with your fingers curled against your chest like claws. It is night. Your lamp has gone out. Your mouth is so dry it feels like wood. You fumble for the jug and knock it over. You do not clean it up. Your groin aches. You know what that means. You do not check. You know. Eventually, you force yourself to your feet again. You do not want to die on the floor like a drunk. You change into a clean shirt. The effort exhausts you. You lie back on the cot, breathing hard. Your pulse feels fast and soft, like a moth trapped behind your ribs. You begin a final entry. You date it. You write day unknown because you've lost track. You describe your symptoms with the clarity of someone long practiced in the language of decline. Fever, tremors, darkening at the jawline, vomiting, restlessness, disassociation, swelling. You record the aching joints, the tenderness of the skin. You admit the rash. You suspect internal bleeding. You're too tired to test the gums for blood. You write prognosis grim. You underline it twice. You do not write a conclusion. You stare at the page, then let the quill roll from your fingers. The ink spreads into a smudge, and you leave it there. You do not remember closing your eyes, but when you open them again, the room is darker, and the sky outside your window is beginning to blue. Your breath comes in short, shallow bursts. Your arms are numb. You lift your head, barely. The mask is still on the shelf. For a moment, you consider putting it on. One last act of theatre. But your hands won't cooperate. You blink, and the shelf becomes a doorway. You blink again, and it's gone. Your final thought is not about medicine. It is not about God. It is not even about the city. It is about the beak of your mask. How ridiculous it always looked. How heavy it felt. How stupidly it made you hope. You think vaguely that someone will find your notes, that someone will know you tried, that maybe, for a moment, the mask meant something. But the world does not mark your passing. There is no bell, no mourner, no prayer. The city does not weep. It forgets. You die sometime before sunrise, alone, unnamed, unmasked. You are not the first, you are not the last, you are not remembered, only recorded, and then not even that. The first to notice your absence is the butcher's boy, and only because he's tired of stepping over the bowl of spoiled stew that's still sitting outside your door. He holds his breath, knocks once, twice, and then flees when no one answers. A few hours later, the apothecary sends his assistant, who knocks louder. Still nothing. The priest is summoned eventually. He arrives with 2 deacons and a censer. They don't knock. They simply open the door. The smell is what they expected, what they feared. Vinegar soured with sweat, damp wool. Something else underneath it, sickly sweet and wrong. They don't go far, just to the threshold. The deacon makes the sign of the cross. The priest mutters something that might be Latin or might just be habit. No one enters. Later that day, 2 gravediggers in patched tunics are offered a bottle of plum brandy apiece and told to remove the body. They make it halfway up the stairs before the stink drives them back down. The next attempt comes with vinegar-soaked cloths tied over their mouths and noses. They succeed, eventually, by not looking too closely and not touching anything bare-handed. The body is limp, curled beside the desk, like it had simply given up mid-note. One of them jokes, a quiet thing, not meant to be heard, that it's lucky the mask is still on. That way, they won't have to see what a plague doctor looks like when he stops pretending. His partner doesn't laugh. They don't carry you far, not out to the burial grounds, not to the charnel house, just a shallow trench behind the tenement, lined with lime and old regrets. Your coat is stripped, your mask tossed to the side. They roll the body in as if turning a log into a fire. One mutters a prayer, but the other is already covering you with soil. The rain comes before the job is finished. They leave the rest for the weather. Inside, the room is not cleaned, not officially. The next morning, a clerk from the city office arrives to collect any remaining documents of civic relevance. He keeps his gloves on. He takes your ledger, your list, and your vial of sealing wax. He doesn't take the loose papers on your desk. He sees your notes, the page where you described your symptoms, your decline, your final observations, and leaves it. The ink is smeared. The handwriting deteriorates as it nears the bottom. It feels too personal. And too late. Someone else is assigned your quarters by the week's end. He is younger, taller. His mask fits better. He wears the coat like armour and speaks with the optimism of someone who has not yet learned to write names he knows into the death ledger. You are not mentioned when he moves in. Only the stench is discussed. A bucket of lye water is splashed over the walls. The rest is left to the drafts. Your belongings disappear one by one. The bowl, the boots, the folded cloth you used to dab your brow. A washerwoman takes the cloak for rags. A clerk burns the leftover herbs. The apothecary keeps the journal, not for the words but for the paper. Blank pages are too precious to waste. Your writing will be scraped away, your observations lost to vinegar and time. There is no service, no requiem, no mention at the cathedral. A new report is filed, listing your cause of death as suspected infection, probable exposure. It is stamped with the seal of the city and placed into a crate that will be forgotten in the cellar when the next war begins. The families you tried to help do not ask after you, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. The girl with the sunken cheeks and rosary calluses dies 3 days after you. The boy with the infected tooth lasts a week. His mother follows before the next moon. The child who almost lived is not seen again. The ledger is updated accordingly. In the taverns, your name is not spoken. The baker does not remember your face. The priest, when pressed, recalls only that the last one was quiet. The apothecary tells the new doctor to keep his gloves clean and his mask dry. He does not mention how often you trembled. The city itself does not change. The bells still ring, though less often now. The rats still scramble. The rain still turns alley dust into paste. Another doctor arrives. Then another. One flees, one dies, the third stays longer, but even he forgets to ask who came before. One day, many weeks later, a boy sneaks into your former quarters, looking for coins or dry bread. He finds the mask under the cot and tries it on. He laughs, muffled by the beak. He leaves it behind when he goes. The mask stays there a while. Then it doesn't. Someone takes it, or throws it out, or sells it. The history of objects is not written in ink, only in silence, absence, and replacement. Years pass. A chronicler, assembling a record of the pestilence, writes down the names of city officials, nobles, bishops, and renowned healers who succumbed. Your name is not among them. He includes a line about 3 or 4 lesser physicians who served during the peak months, but no details. He notes that most died. He moves on. The building where you lived is torn down to make room for a new granary. The workers find no bones, just a fragment of leather, too rotted to identify, and a shard of glass that might have been a lens. They discard both. They do not tell anyone. One day, the plague ends, or slows, or moves on. No one declares it over. It simply stops being new. You are not remembered in relief, nor in mourning, only in routine, in the way the new doctor stirs his tinctures, in the way he pauses when writing a name too young, in the way his hand sometimes shakes when the fever season returns. You are not meant to be remembered, only replaced. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story, not of miracles or mercy, but of vinegar masks, hollow prayers, and the slow erasure of a man who was never truly seen, to begin with. If you enjoyed this descent into Renaissance decay, feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with a historical nightmare you'd like to see covered next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.